So I have to say, with looking forward at what's potentially coming this week, um, I think it's best to maybe have a bit of fun while we can, because I highly suspect that certainly this week we are going to be talking once again very heavily about the Northern Ireland Protocol, like we just have this week. So at least while everything seems quiet, it isn't. There is stuff going on, but at this moment, it seems quiet. So I'm going to take this opportunity to have a bit of fun with you all. So wind your minds back to this time last year. And again, correct me if I'm wrong. I might be maybe a week or two out. But at this point last year, the Conservatives were on the high. COVID was finally over, they were proclaiming, and they could finally get on with ruling the country as they saw fit with their big majority. Finally, they could move forward and do some, conservative things that they were looking forward to. Of course, they didn't exactly say what they were looking forward to doing. It was just going to do conservative things. Take that of what you will. But of course, only a couple of either a week or I think it was 2 weeks, the Owen Paterson scandal would break out. And then, of course, there was still, obviously, at the time, Partygate. Some of the revelations had just come out, but the Conservatives were still, at that time, able to at least, just hand wash some of those allegations away. They were on a high, talking about how they could win the next general election easily with like both hands tied behind their back. And of course, now that's not the case. Not the case at all, especially when you look at the polls. And of course, this has a lot of Conservatives in a very, very, very big tizzy. And some have resigned themselves to losing at the next election, saying that they deserve it. And they very much do. After all, they've been the party that's been in power this amount of time. It's not like they've got anyone else to blame but themselves for the mess that they are currently in. However, there are some Conservatives who are saying, no, 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 we can still somehow salvage this situation by appealing to these groups at the next general election who are going to play a big part. We only have to offer them things for us to vote. They would, vote for us. This new dimension, this revelation that they've come to, that maybe they should actually start appealing to other groups in this country, because their typical group of the, shall we say, over 60s didn't really, how shall we say, have a good time, certainly during COVID. Not only that, there has been a lot of resentment. They're going to lose the Red Wall. They have lost this alliance that they built during sort of the Brexit campaign, that was Boris Johnson linking all these different groups together. They have not got on well, certainly in Parliament. And of course, they've got all that massively different priorities. Levelling up hasn't been fulfilled. It's been, to be honest, a colossal mess. But there are still Conservatives who are convinced that only if they, can get through the next 2 years, and to be honest, I've said before, I very much doubt they can get through this year, that they can somehow manage to survive. So we're going to go over to Conservative Home. As I said, it's probably one of my favorite comedy websites at the moment, but we're going to go have a look at what this guy has had to say. A guy called Nat Way, and he is a conservative. I think he's a sort of in with sort of the party. He's not obviously a Conservative Party, MP, but he is sort of someone who sort of pushes the Conservative ideology, and he has come forward to say, no, this is what we must do to help these different groups. And to be honest, it's a fun time. It's a fun time indeed in the Conservative Party. So before we go cracking on into some of these groups of what he tends to reach out for, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, my one donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club as well. You can join down below. That all helps support the channel. And of course, please do remember to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, do remember to ring the bell as well. That'll get you notifications of when we do a new video or when we go live. So as always, guys, like I say, thank you very much to everyone who does help and support the channel. Now on with this. And off we go over to Conservative Home with this piece by the 5 groups of targeted voters that we need to win over at the next election and what we can offer them. So he has a bit of a preamble about what we can do to win them over, why they have to win them over. Obviously, it's to win, but let's get started. So the first group he wants to target is women. So the biggest issue that is going to affect women in the coming years politically, and certainly under a Labour administration. So interesting enough that, again, this is meant to win, shall we say. We'll see. So the biggest issue that is going to affect women, especially in the coming years politically, and certainly under a Labour administration, is going to be the erosion of their rights by the introduction of pro-trans legislation. What? Particularly the self-identification without the need for medical proof. That's not going to erode women's rights. Okay, so he's basically saying somehow to attract women voters, we need to start playing the culture war game. Now, I have said this. I think if you look at the current British public, this is not a thing. I think in some sections of society, absolutely, this is still a thing. But I do not think this is a thing. The culture wars, the Conservatives, and certainly as he is trying to desperately here, trying to import this over, doesn't seem to be working. It has not worked. Kimmy Badenoch, their main cheerleader for this whole culture war nonsense, didn't win. She didn't, storm to victory. She hardly, made big waves in the Conservative Party by pushing this stuff. So it doesn't seem to have worked. And as we saw in America in the recent polls, neither did this seem to, shall we say, galvanize sort of Republican support where they tried to push this stuff. If anything, it did turn out to be a massive failure. So it's kind of hilariously funny that they want to push this. So this is really strange that they want to sort of push this nonsense, and it is, to be honest, the rest of this stuff. I'm not going to bother because it's culture war stuff. So again, he talks about pro-trans legislation. This will somehow erode women's rights. Don't really see how it will, but make the claim all you want, my friend. I don't see how it will. And he wants to support more families. And of course, this is their freedom to choose how they raise their kids and their financial choices generally. So, of course, this is talking about championing private schools, which, again, as we've seen before, actually damages our education massively by these schools getting massive tax breaks, and of course, definitely hurting the sort of curriculum. And of course, this is the fun part. Labour, again, instinctively want to nanny and take over the role of parents, such as by championing the registration of all children not in schools and forcing those whose educational ideology they disagree with to go into schooling when they can be more directly control the curriculum. What? Again, to be honest, that seems to be a complete mess of a statement. But there you go. Anyway, on to the next group. That, to me, doesn't seem to be really attracting women to the Conservative Party and pushing that nonsense. But, you crack on. You crack on there. Anyway, next one, millennials. And he is right. Millennials, especially at the next general election, are certainly coming more and more into the voter pool. In fact, I think officially at this election, I think we will now have a the biggest millennium vote than we've ever had before. So this is absolutely a potential group that all parties will have to appeal to. But of course, what's his plan for attracting millennials to the Conservative Party? So, speaking of childcare, if you haven't noticed, millennials have been having babies lately, often with huge student debts and unaffordable housing costs. These are now and soon going to be faced with enormous childcare costs and patchy provision. Okay, you could, off the bat, cancel student debt. Why not? That's a legitimate thing you could do. Maybe you could actually tackle the affordability of housing. But bear in mind, it is your party that has been in charge, your party that has made the housing crisis 10 times worse, advocating for what I should be calling it. And to be honest, we should all be calling it now the absolute housing disaster that the Conservatives have sleepwalked us into. And now, with enormous childcare costs and patchy provision, well, remember, most playgroups and nurseries were funded a lot by European Union and mostly by local council funding. And what have the Conservatives targeted heavily over years of austerity? Causing, again, my favorite, well, I say my favorite quote about austerity, but I think it sums up austerity quite succinctly. It's my own, one of the local councillors, Steve Houghton, who basically just said about austerity, things just disappear. And one of the things that have just disappeared have been nurseries, playgroups, things that help these, millennial parents. It's just no longer there. They've just disappeared because of austerity. And let's label it lightly, Tory austerity. Again, he just goes on to talk about how they would do it, but again, he sort of heavily relies on private sector. Again, that's the usual Tory reach the private sector. Somehow it will solve all these problems. But of course, as we've seen before, private sector can't solve everything. And of course, no matter, the Tories will always say that's what solves it. But again, it doesn't. So this is the fun one. This was what made me want to do this, because it's just so fun. So, students and graduates. Again, quite aptly, yes, again, a large voting bloc, true, but also, as we've said before, unfortunately, a voting bloc that very often does not exercise their political power, unfortunately. But again, that's, I think, a wider sort of separate issue. So, what does he have to say, and how does he intend to attract these students and graduates? You get ready, strap yourselves in for this one. So, according to me, any support given must be linked with tackling the high levels of woke indoctrination they face at university. More culture war stuff, but okay. You crack on. you crack on pushing this stuff. And then this is where it starts to get funny. So one approach might be to offer debt relief or forgiveness as prizes for those students and graduates who can pass national tests with which they achieve high scores for tolerance of other viewpoints, lateral thinking, and critical thinking. What? What does that mean? What does that mean? Oh, yes, you can. Oh, You can write off your debt, young Jimmy. All you have to do is pass this national test where you have to prove your tolerance for other viewpoints, lateral thinking, and critical thinking. There you go, Jimmy. A high score, and you can kiss your debt goodbye. What? 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 What on earth? What on earth is that even as an idea? Ah, That's insane. But anyway, he continues to say students could have their debts paid off based on their ranking in such awards at both the level of the university and nationally. And institutions themselves could have their funding increased or decreased on how many prize winners they have as students or alumni, with funds saved from institutions shut or trimmed down, recycled into funding more prizes. So essentially, you see, obviously, a lot of the universities, depending, their graduates can go on to do different things. That is insane because now you are creating a system where a lot more of the better funded universities just go on to do even better, and universities that do crank out a lot of very good stuff. For example, Nottingham. Nottingham has a very, very good law department. But there are a lot of people out there who think that if you went to Nottingham to do law, that you somehow failed as a law graduate, that it's not considered to be a good place to do law. And to be honest, this will just encourages more academic snobbery. And this guy is now saying we are going to actively encourage and reward academic snobbery. This is not a good idea. This is not how you attract students or graduates. If Labour even came out and offered this, I would be balking at this as well. But Jesus. It also goes on to say, let's finish this off for the students because Jesus Christ. Employers might also find it useful to help them identify the best talent. So, not only this, but they are going to use those awards based on tolerance for other viewpoints, lateral and critical thinking, so that employers can find out who is the best one. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but you crack on with your crazy ideas. Jesus. But he continues with the funds required to do this would be much lower than investing more universal debt forgiveness a la Joe Biden, but if communicated correctly, could give a strong reason for students and graduates to vote conservative and to help tackle the out of control wokery in itinerary itinerary education. Geez, that's not how that happens. But again, this leads into a wider issue of them focusing so much on these culture war stuff that they end up damaging um certain fields because of this. You've seen them go after historians before because of this. That's like, that's woke history. And of course, what happens, they've defunded huge grants that were given to sort of history departments. And history is, I would say, a massive, wonderful subject that people should go on. And if they want to go on and study it for their education, they should be encouraged to do so. And I think this, does nothing but damage the education system that, again, conservatives praise apparently so much. So this becomes a good one. So their next target is low income men. Let's see what they've got on offer. So, for men from left behind communities, A massive expansion of apprenticeships is needed, but in which they are incentivized and backed over time and part own the machines and automation that they help introduce into their existing chosen industries, essentially by helping them form employee maker guilds with capital ownership or option rights. So essentially, you're saying that offer apprenticeships, which, okay, fine, I've got no problems with, but I think the larger question becomes how you offer those apprenticeships, because to be honest, the apprenticeship scheme certainly uh, under the current system really hasn't been used properly and has very much been sucked up by large companies who have then taken on these massive cheap employees and then not provided them with the jobs that they were certainly promised after they finished their apprenticeships. And unfortunately, you now have, just as you've got many people with sort of these big degrees, you've now got people who've gone through all these apprenticeships and have now gone, oh, well, I was promised a job at the end of this. I now don't have a job. And are now competing in, again, these fields for more jobs. They become more, so it's a lot more competitive. And of course, people lose out because it has become more and more competitive. Did they talk about that? No, of course. And I don't understand sort of the idea, the incentive for their part owned machines and the automation. What do you mean? Does if the laborer moves jobs or the apprentice moves jobs, do they then get to take that machine with them? Uh, what? that doesn't really make any sense on that. And also, again, guilds. There's a reason why we do not have guilds anymore. Guilds heavily encourage monopolies. And of course, monopolies are not good. There is a reason why the guilds and their power got completely broken, especially during the Industrial Revolution, because these guilds, if anything, held back modernization. They weren't pro modernization, they were anti modernization. Back in the, again, Industrial Revolution, most of the Luddites that were in and around, and the breakers were from these guilds because they did not want the machine to come in and break the power that these guilds had over their own monopoly. That seems a really ridiculous idea to push forward, my friend. But again, like I say, I did tell you this was going to be a bit of a comedy performance, but Anyway, so why is he doing this? So he says the reason why. So by doing so, we cannot break the stronghold of the unions and labor, who tend to seek to make productivity and automation an enemy of workers, and instead share part of the savings, bonuses, and the upside generated with smaller pools of workers who agree to upskill and introduce new time and money saving technologies. No one is against introducing these technologies, but you've got to treat the workers fair. And now you're saying that the larger sort of worker pools should be essentially shunned because there is a small minority of workers who, for some reason, agree with being exploited. Anyway, and he goes on to continue with a special scheme is to be provided to accommodation for such workers in empty shops and offices, helping them to be guardians while they train, and could also help with access to housing, including a creative maker talent to back in our own town centres, whilst creating hope, particularly for men who tend not to have priority on social housing lists, and even get kicked out of social housing when they turn 18. Now, again, that is a problem. With, again, young men being kicked out of social housing when they turn 18, but it's also a problem for young women as well. And again, you could solve this problem by building more social housing, which you have not. for the entire justification, for the entire duration, shall we say, of the Conservative Parliament that we have seen for the past decade and more. You could also, again, who runs this accommodation? Is it council? Or, as I highly suspect you haven't mentioned, you would probably want it to be private ownership. And we have seen what such private ownership has contributed, because I've said before, there needs to be a serious look at private landlords in the UK and reining them in. Not, But anyway, yeah, yet another bizarre, crazy idea that, well, would not work, and if anything, create more problems in certainly the UK, because again, guilds were not exactly, shall we say, the massive bastion of progressive and adopting these new machines that you claim they were. But again, there we go. Car owners. The quote, often unnecessary alienators in the quest to get to net zero. They can win over car drivers or cars and vans by capping the ability of councils and mayors to milk them financially through low emission charging schemes, the overly high parking costs, and the creation of low traffic neighborhoods that just create more reasons to find drivers. Again, why do these exist? Everyone recognizes we need to lower carbon emissions. We need to get more people out of cars onto public transports. We need to give them another reason. Why not instead give them sustainable transport? Why not expand public transport by, bringing more buses, if, as we said before, localism into local council control so that local councils can get these buses going? How about, you take, subsidize the less owned routes, have weekend buses and weekend services? Uh, there's so much stuff you could actually do and propose that would benefit car owners, but you don't. And I'm struggling to see why. So, most drivers do not live in the biggest cities and cannot access public transport or easily use alternative, especially those in rural and suburb parts of the country. True. That is true. Um, Now, I don't agree with most drivers, of course, do not live in the biggest cities. Um, like I say, some of the biggest cities we have in the UK suffer from massive, massive congestion. And you've got to, deal with this congestion. You just seem to not want to deal with a potential problem. Instead, you just hope that somehow it will go away if you get rid of these things. Doesn't really seem a viable alternative to just, you know, close your eyes and put your fingers in the ears and just go la la la, you know, um, congestion doesn't exist. Anyway, he continues. We can, however, still incentivize more sustainable travel, reduce traffic, and create income for councils by identifying and deregulating the creation of sites around the country where people could park, charge up their cars, and switch to other models of transport to go into our towns and high street in exchange for fuel vouchers that reduce their fuel duty and costs. Don't really see how that could work. Park and ride schemes is essentially what he's really calling it. It's a park and ride scheme. Park and ride schemes have been around for years. Still doesn't help to solve the problem of congestion. So, if you scraped and saved the money spent on most of our quote restrictive measures placed on drivers around the country, you would have a significant pot to divert to these incentives. But most of these things, when you look at it, add far more money to certainly the local economy by doing this. Freeing up congestion in a lot of our sort of big cities would actually be a massive boon. to certainly the industrial the sort of the commercial activity in these cities. What you are saying is you take away all that and just hope that these park and ride schemes, which again you are suggesting, which do exist in the vast majority of a lot of cities, is somehow going to work. You also say sustainable travel. What do you mean by sustainable travel? Do you mean bus and rail, which should be massively, certainly targeting that, because this isn't just targeting car owners. Investment in public transport would be a massive boon to everyone. But then again, you've been in power for quite a long time, and yet you don't want to do this. You've had massive opportunity to invest in rail, the integrated rail plan, HS2, Northern Powerhouse Rail, and yet your party has continued to not invest in these programs. Why on earth should we now suddenly suggest that this is how you will, succeed? I, I, I do sort of find that hilarious. But yes, this, ladies and gentlemen, is a plan from the Conservatives to win over these certain groups at the next general election. Are you in one of these particular groups? Do you find any of these plans hilarious as I do? Let me know down in the comments. Jesus. Yeah, that's hilarious. That is absolutely hilarious on so many levels. There's someone who has no idea, even probably talking with people in those demographics, especially the millennials, the student and graduates, and again, bizarre. Bizarre. But there you go. This is, again, the current conundrum in the Conservative Party. And to be honest, the longer this goes on, the more hilarious it becomes, because you get them suggesting weird ideas like this, that to reduce your student debt, you have to take a test proving that you have tolerance for other people's ideas. I'd have to ask this guy a question who wrote this article. What on earth would be a question on that test? How exactly do you put forward a test to prove that people have tolerance for other ideas? What question would be on those tests? Uh, What? Just Jesus Christ! That's such a stupid idea. But there you go. Anyway, yeah, please do remember to hit the like, share, and subscribe button on your way out, guys. And of course, down below there are links to all my other stuff to help support the channel, the YouTube thank you button, the Pony Club, the buy me coffee link, the Patreon link, all down below. And as always, we'll see you all next time. But yeah, having a bit of fun before we end up probably having a week devoted to despairing about the current situation, the direction over the Northern Ireland Protocol, and potentially risking peace in Northern Ireland. I hope that's been a bit of a fun distraction for you. But yeah, oh boy. Anyway, as always, guys, we'll see you all next time.